She walked into a saloon full of dangerous men, looked straight at the deadliest one, and said 3 words that made everyone freeze. "Marry me, Silas." The sun was setting behind the dusty mountains of Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that seemed to set the whole desert on fire. The year was 1887, and this small town had seen its share of outlaws, gunfights, and broken dreams. But nothing had ever shocked the people of Cedar Ridge quite like what happened on that warm September evening. Eleanor Mae Sinclair stood at the window of her small dress shop, her fingers pressing against the glass as she watched him ride into town. His name was Silas Blackwood, and every man, woman, and child in Cedar Ridge knew to stay out of his way. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, and eyes so dark they seemed to hold all the secrets of the night. A scar ran down the left side of his face, a reminder of battles fought and survived. People whispered that he had killed 17 men, though no one knew for certain. What they did know was that when Silas Blackwood walked into a room, everyone else walked out. Eleanor was 26 years old, considered a spinster by the standards of her time. Her mother had died, giving birth to her younger brother, who himself had been taken by fever at the age of 7. Her father had passed just 3 months ago, leaving her alone in the world with nothing but a small dress shop and a heart full of memories. She had dark brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and eyes the color of spring leaves after rain. People said she was pretty, but Eleanor had never cared much for what people said. She cared about what she felt, and right now, watching Silas Blackwood tie his horse outside the saloon, she felt something she could not explain. She had first seen him 2 years ago when he had ridden through town chasing a band of outlaws who had stolen from the bank in the next county. She remembered the way he had moved, silent and deadly, like a wolf tracking its prey. She remembered the way his eyes had met hers for just 1 moment as he passed by her shop. And in that moment, she had seen something that no one else seemed to notice. Behind all that darkness and danger, she had seen loneliness. A loneliness so deep and profound that it had taken her breath away. From that day forward, Eleanor had watched him whenever he came to town. She noticed things that others missed. She noticed how he always left extra coins for the serving girls at the saloon, even though he never spoke more than 2 words to them. She noticed how he had once stopped his horse in the middle of the road to let a stray dog cross safely. She noticed how he always visited the cemetery on the hill before leaving town, standing before a small, unmarked grave with his hat pressed against his chest. Tonight, as she watched him disappear into the saloon, Eleanor made a decision that would change her life forever. She did not know where the courage came from, or perhaps she did. Perhaps it came from the same place that had kept her going after every loss, every heartbreak, every lonely night spent wondering if there was more to life than simply surviving. She closed her shop, hung the small wooden sign that said she would return tomorrow, and walked across the dusty street toward the saloon. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her hands were trembling at her sides. But her steps did not falter, not once. The saloon fell silent when she pushed through the swinging doors. Every pair of eyes turned to look at her, and she could feel the weight of their stares, like physical pressure against her skin. Women like her did not come into places like this. Women like her were supposed to stay home, sewing dresses and waiting for a respectable man to come calling. But Eleanor was tired of waiting. She was tired of being respectable. She was tired of being alone. Silas Blackwood was sitting at a table in the corner, a glass of whiskey in front of him that he had not touched. His dark eyes lifted to meet hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Eleanor walked toward him, her worn boots clicking against the wooden floor with each step. She could hear people whispering, could feel their shock and disbelief, but she did not care. She only cared about reaching him. When she finally stood before his table, she had to remind herself to breathe. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had imagined. The scar on his face was deeper than it appeared from a distance, and his jaw was set in a hard line that seemed carved from stone. But his eyes, those dark, mysterious eyes, held something that made her brave. She did not sit down. She did not ask permission. She simply looked at him and spoke the words that had been building inside her for 2 long years. "I want you to marry me." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone dropped a glass somewhere behind her, and the sound of it shattering seemed impossibly loud. She could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what the most feared man in Cedar Ridge would do to this foolish woman who had dared to approach him. Silas Blackwood stared at her for what felt like an eternity. His expression did not change, not even a flicker. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair and spoke 4 words that Eleanor would never forget as long as she lived. "You do not know me." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel scraping against stone. It sent shivers down her spine, but not from fear. Never from fear. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "I know enough." He let out a sound that might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You know what people say about me. You know the stories." "I know the stories," Eleanor agreed. "And I know that stories are not always the truth." Something flickered in his eyes then, something that looked almost like pain. "The truth is worse than the stories, Miss Sinclair." She felt a jolt of surprise that he knew her name. "How do you know who I am?" For the first time, he looked away. "I know everything about everyone in this town. It is how I stay alive." "Then you know that I am alone," Eleanor said softly. "You know that I have no family, no one who would miss me if I disappeared tomorrow. You know that I spend every night in an empty house, talking to ghosts, because there is no one else to talk to." Silas turned back to look at her, and this time, there was something different in his expression. Something raw and unguarded. "What makes you think I could give you anything better than that?" Eleanor pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, ignoring the gasps from the other patrons. "Because I see you, Silas Blackwood. I see past the gun on your hip and the scar on your face. I see the man who leaves money for girls who have nothing. I see the man who visits a grave that has no name. I see the man who is just as lonely as I am, maybe even more so." His hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles turned white. "You see what you want to see?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I see what is there. And what I see is a man who has been running for so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to stand still. A man who has built walls so high that he has trapped himself inside them. A man who deserves more than a life spent in shadows." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were fighting some internal battle. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "There was a woman once, a long time ago. She thought she could save me too." Eleanor felt her heart clench. What happened to her? The pain in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. "She died because of me, because I thought I could have a normal life. Because I let my guard down for one moment, and my enemies found her before I could protect her." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, but she did not look away. "I am sorry." "Do not be sorry," Silas said harshly. "Be smart. Walk away from this table. Go back to your shop and forget you ever spoke to me. That is the only way this ends well for you." Eleanor reached across the table and did something that made every person in that saloon gasp in shock. She placed her hand over his. His skin was rough and calloused, marked by years of hard living, but beneath all that, she could feel his pulse racing. "I am not afraid to die," she said quietly. "I have been afraid of living. There is a difference." Silas stared at their joined hands as if he could not comprehend what he was seeing. "Why me? There are good men in this town, men who could give you children, and a home and a life without looking over your shoulder every moment of every day. Because they do not need me," Eleanor answered simply. "You do." Something broke in his expression then, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long that it had become a part of him. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps I am both," Eleanor said with a small smile. Silas pulled his hand away and stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward with a crash. The entire saloon seemed to hold its breath as he looked down at her with an intensity that could have set the building on fire. "Go home, Miss Sinclair." Then he walked past her and out the door, leaving her sitting alone at the table with 100 pairs of eyes watching her every move. But Eleanor Mae Sinclair had not survived 26 years of hardship by giving up easily. She stood up, straightened her dress, and walked out of the saloon with her head held high. She found him at the cemetery on the hill, standing before that small, unmarked grave, just as she knew he would be. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the weathered headstones and the wild grass that grew between them. He heard her approach, but did not turn around. "Her name was Sarah," he said quietly. "We were going to be married. I had put my guns away, found work at a ranch outside of town. I thought I could leave my past behind." Eleanor stopped beside him, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. "What happened? Men I had wronged came looking for me. They found her instead. By the time I got there, it was too late." Tears slipped silently down Eleanor's cheeks. How long ago? 8 years. 8 years of running, fighting, and killing. 8 years of making sure no one ever got close enough to be used against me again. Eleanor turned to face him, reaching up to touch the scar on his face. He flinched, but did not pull away. "You have been punishing yourself for 8 years, she said softly. "Do you think that is what she would have wanted?" His voice cracked when he answered. "It does not matter what she wanted. She is gone because of me. She is gone because of evil. Men who made evil choices." Eleanor corrected gently. "You did not kill her, Silas. They did." He finally looked at her, then, and she could see the tears glistening in his dark eyes. Tears that he had probably not allowed himself to shed in years. "If I let you in," he whispered, "and something happens to you, I will not survive it. I have nothing left to lose, Eleanor. Nothing except this darkness that has kept me alive." Eleanor stepped closer, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Then, let me be your light." For a long, agonizing moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, hesitantly, as if he had forgotten how to perform such a simple human gesture, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentler than she had expected, reverent almost, as if she were something precious that might break. "You are asking me to take a chance that could destroy us both," he said. "I am asking you to live," Eleanor replied. "Really live, not just survive." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had changed. The walls that had stood so tall for so long were crumbling, and behind them was the man she had always known was there. A man capable of love and tenderness and hope. 4 words, he said quietly. Eleanor frowned in confusion. What? You asked me to marry you, and I said 4 words. Now I have 4 different words to say. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Yes, I will try. It was not a declaration of undying love. It was not a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was real, and it was honest. And for Eleanor, it was enough. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church on the edge of town. The preacher had been reluctant at first, but Eleanor had convinced him that every soul deserved a chance at redemption. Only a handful of people attended, mostly out of curiosity rather than genuine well-wishing. But Eleanor did not mind. She only cared about the man standing beside her, his hand trembling slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. The first months were not easy. Silas woke most nights from nightmares that left him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. He struggled to let his guard down, struggled to believe that he deserved the happiness Eleanor was offering him. But she was patient, so patient, holding him through the dark nights and loving him through the difficult days. And slowly, day by day, week by week, month by month, he began to change. The hardness in his eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders eased. He started to smile, really smile, in a way that transformed his entire face and made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. He took a job at the local ranch, just as he had done all those years ago, before tragedy had stolen his dreams. He hung up his guns, though he never got rid of them entirely. Some habits were too ingrained to break completely, but he no longer reached for them at every sound, no longer slept with one eye open, no longer looked at every stranger as a potential threat. People in town began to see him differently. The man they had feared for so long started helping rebuild fences after storms, started carrying groceries for elderly widows, started teaching young boys how to ride horses properly. He was still quiet, still reserved, but the menace that had once surrounded him like a dark cloud had lifted. And Eleanor, for the first time in her life, knew what it meant to be truly happy. It was a cool spring morning, almost 2 years after their wedding, when Eleanor told him the news. She found him in the barn, brushing down the horse he had brought with him from his old life. She stood in the doorway, her hand pressed against her still flat stomach, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Silas," she said softly. He turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away. "Yes, my heart," she smiled, tears of joy streaming down her face. "We are going to have a baby." The brush fell from his hand and clattered to the ground. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. He crossed the barn in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly that she could barely breathe. She could feel his tears falling into her hair, could feel his body shaking with emotion. "You have given me everything," he whispered against her ear. "Everything I thought I had lost forever. A home, a family, a reason to live." Eleanor pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "You gave me the same thing, Silas. You gave me a partner to face the world with, someone to share the good days and the bad days and everything in between." He kissed her, then, a kiss full of promise and hope, and a love so deep it seemed to have no bottom. That night, as they lay together in the small farmhouse they now called home, Silas traced lazy patterns on her skin and told her all the things he had never said before. He told her about his childhood, about the father who had abandoned him and the mother who had died too young. He told her about the first man he had killed and how it had haunted him for months afterward. He told her about Sarah, about the life they had planned together, and about the day he had found her body in their small cabin. And Eleanor listened, absorbing every word, every pain, every scar on his soul. She did not try to fix him or heal him. She simply loved him, all of him, the light and the dark and everything in between. When he finally fell silent, she pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he replied. "Thank you for seeing something worth saving when I had given up on myself." She lifted her head to meet his eyes. "I will never give up on you, Silas Blackwood, not as long as I live." He smiled, and in that smile she saw their future stretching out before them. A future full of challenges, yes, but also full of love and laughter and the family they would build together. And it all started because one brave woman had walked into a saloon and asked the most feared man in town to marry her, and he had said 4 words back: "You do not know me." But she had known him. She had known him better than anyone, better than he knew himself. And that was enough.